Hi there, my name is Tyrant44, and today I'm showing off this fully functional card table that I designed. And I actually originally built this over 3 years ago, but the design is still very solid. So what makes this design unique compared to others is that each player has their own spot to draw cards from, and you do that by standing on one of these note blocks and right-clicking it. And then a card will show up in the barrel. So by using note blocks instead of buttons, you can put in pretty fast inputs. So if I want 5 cards, I hit this note block 5 times, and all 5 cards should show up. And there are 6 spaces around the table for this, and all players can draw simultaneously, which definitely speeds up the game a bit. And you can also draw cards to the middle of the table by hitting this note block. And then you can put the cards in this shulker to discard them, and flip this lever to shuffle them back into the system. And down here you can see how the shuffler system mixes up the cards. And the cards are just banners, and for different suits I've used different colors, and these are all craftable in survival. But if you use commands you can make the 6 and 9 a bit nicer. And if your game needs jokers, you can really just use anything you want, but here's a few design ideas. So the idea with this is that you play your card game within the middle shulker here. So let's say for instance you want to play Texas Hold'em. So you would place an item to represent each of the players up in the upper right hand corner of the shulker here. It could be player heads or anything else really. And then each player draws their 2 cards. And then each player will place their wager under their head here. And when the pot's good, you take them all and move them down to the lower left hand corner of the shulker. Then you hit the note block 3 times for the flop. Then you would do your next round of betting, then the turn, and then the river. And then each player would display their hands underneath their heads here. Looks like a set of 7s won. Also, if you need more space for your game, you could definitely swap out the shulker with a double chest. It just doesn't look as nice. Alright, so now I'm going to break down the redstone. This won't be a tutorial exactly, but I'll go over each component and there will be a world download in the description. However, first I need to point out that the location that you build this is very important. So due to some jankiness in Minecraft, you could build the whole thing perfectly, and the shuffler system just won't work. But then you just move it over by 1 block, and it'll work just fine. So you definitely want to build the shuffler system first and load it with a full deck to test it out before you build the whole thing. So after a bit of further investigation, I found that it only seems to work when it's centered on an odd numbered X coordinate. You have to look in the block tab in your F3 menu here. But that's only true for this world, because over in the other world it was working on an even numbered X coordinate. So again, just test the shuffler first. So the shuffler is just a circle of droppers, and they mix the cards up pretty well. But in this design, I have to bridge some of the dropper lines with hoppers. And you'll notice here that the last 4 cards get stuck because the hopper speed can't keep up with the dropper speed. But this is actually okay, because when you draw cards, they'll still be randomized. And if you want to make sure they're shuffled really extra well, then you just need to cycle the shuffler on and off a couple times, and it'll be a whole new set of cards. So the next component is the discard system, and this is just a line of hoppers in a barrel facing into a dropper. There's enough room for the entire deck with 1 card left in the shulker. And when you turn on the shuffler, it'll empty the cards from the discard pile and shuffle them back into the system. And when the discard pile completely runs out, there will be a chime to let you know. You just have to make sure that this repeater is set to 4 ticks, and this redstone dust is in dot mode. And you can easily change this out for a different note block sound, or even a bell. So next are the triggers to draw the cards, and I've made these circuits with the andesite blocks, and for the one going to the middle of the table with the red sandstone. And these are just note blocks being detected by observers, and when you right click them, they do 2 things. First, they send a single short pulse to the shuffler, and that's just to keep the cards rotating as you're playing. And second, they very briefly unlock a hopper below the shuffler, just long enough to pull a single card out. And in order to do this, they need to briefly deactivate a redstone torch, But just the pulse from the observer is too short to do this, so first it needs to run through a repeater with a 2-tick delay. Without the repeater, or with it on single-tick delay, it won't deactivate the torch. Next up are the dropper lines that feed the cards into the barrels. And for the one going to the center of the table, it needs to run through a couple of hoppers and then into another dropper to go into the shulker. And next are the circuits to power the dropper lines, which I've made with the diorite blocks. And they trigger when they detect a card in the bottom dropper. Now there are a couple of ways to make these circuits. One is with redstone torches and another with observer chains. I opted for torches when I made this. You could maybe make it a little bit more compact with the observer chains, but the torches are silent. Though I did use an observer chain for the one going to the center, because that's what I could get to fit. And these note blocks down at the bottom are just to update the bottom droppers, otherwise they could get stuck in the triggered state. So we also need to power the dropper that feeds into the center shulker, and I'm actually going to build this part on camera. So we need an observer facing down there, and then another one coming out of that, and then a block below the dropper, and an observer facing into that. And then a note block here, and a comparator here. And now, whatever passes through this hopper will end up in the shulker. Now we need to hook up the lever to turn on the shuffler, and we actually use this note block for that as well. So we put a wool and a lever on top of that, and then an observer facing out of the note block. Then another note block here, and now I need to get into crawl mode. There we go. And then an observer out of there, and an observer there. And now when we flip the lever, it'll turn on the shuffler. So at this point, the card table completely works, but there are 2 more circuits that we can add that are optional, but I would definitely recommend them. And these are both flush lines. The first is a system flush, so if we flip that lever, it will flush out all of the cards in the system, and they'll appear in these barrels here. This will be useful if you want to account for the cards, or if you're playing a game like Euchre where you need to remove part of the deck. Also remember to turn the lever off when you're done. And then this one is a dropper tower flush. So sometimes cards can get stuck in the dropper towers, and the system flush won't even flush these out. But with the dropper tower flush, we can activate all of the dropper towers and flush out any stuck cards. And finally, the last step is just to build the table itself. And I like to use these trapdoors to put a border around the table, but they're not necessary. You also need to make sure that the floor is made out of a material that has slabs, otherwise these torches will power these note blocks and hoppers. Anyway, once again, the world download is down in the description. I just ask that you leave a like on the video if you use the design, or if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you want to see more Redstone content. Thanks for watching.